Started.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shubhendu Chandar. I'm the president of the ISACA Kolkata chapter. Uh, it is my great pleasure to welcome CA Abdul Rafeq, uh, who will be doing his presentation on COBIT. The, Abdul Rafeq has been a speaker in various forums. He has been presenter. He has been an international authority on various matters of information technology. He has traveled worldwide to make presentations, and I don't see any reason why we need to present the detailed about Mr. Rafiq. He is already well known across the country, and it is our immense pleasure to have him as a speaker today. Uh, it is really a big fortune for our chapter, and I'm sure that today he will be giving us great details about COBIT. COBIT, of course, is a standard which is used by ISACA, and it is used by across the globe. In fact, the CA Institute has also adopted COBIT as a framework. Without wasting any further time, let me invite CA Abdul Rafiq to kindly make his presentation. Over to you, Rafiq.
Thank you, Suvendo, and thank you, Subrata, and all the office bearers and officers of the ISACA Kolkata chapter. In fact, I consider Kolkata as my second home. I've visited so many times since the last 20 to 30 years. And I've got very good friends, and I have made a lot of presentations and conducted workshops in the ISACA Kolkata chapter. It's my privilege and honor to be able to present this workshop on COBIT 2019. I remember when we formed the chapter of ISACA Bangalore in 1995. I think ISACA Kolkata also got formed in 1 or 2 years. And we had the privilege of visiting Kolkata and making and participating in various presentations. This presentation on COBIT 2019 is based on my 3-day workshop, which I did from 1st to 3rd March for Alceda Bank in Phnom Penh, Cambodia. So this 3-day workshop was for about 21 hours. My objective is to actually compress this 21-hour workshop into a 2-hour workshop for you. And my objective is to see that you are able to get the knowledge and insights, which probably will save you more than 200 hours if you're spent on reading this particular document of COBIT. COBIT, as you know, stands for Control Objectives for Information Related Technology. This has been a framework which has been the most popular framework of ISACA. And this is one which is very dear to my heart, because in 1995, when I became a member of ISACA and passed the CISA exam, I also decided to specialize in IS audit. And one of the frameworks which I came across was COBIT. And at that time, it was called as Control Objectives. And I started using the Control Objectives in 1996. In 1998 is the time when the first edition of COBIT was released. So incidentally, I think we have passed more than a quarter of century since the COBIT has been evolved. I had the privilege of speaking at various conferences on COBIT. Incidentally, when I started using COBIT in 1996, I set a goal that I should be speaking on COBIT at international conference, and luckily I was able to do that at a global conference, ISACA in New York. And then I set a goal that by 10 years, probably 2010, I should become a member of the COBIT task force, the task force which actually makes COBIT. So I just didn't want to be a COBIT reader and COBIT implementer and trainer, but also one who actually helps in progressing the growth of COBIT, and luckily in 2008, I was a member of the COBIT task force, and I had the privilege of being a reviewer of various publications of ISACA. Let's go ahead. Now, this presentation is a little unique now because this is the first time I'm speaking on the topic of how you can use COBIT 2019 as an all-purpose tool for digital trust professionals. I'll also clarify who is a digital trust professional because the new concept which has been brought in by ISACA and is being aggressively promoted by ISACA in a very big way. All of us are digital trust professionals, but how are we digital trust professionals and how COBIT could be useful? What are way we use it is what we're going to explain in this workshop. This is a brief profile of mine just to give you an idea that I passed my CA in 1985 and the CISA in 1995. I've also been a faculty of the DISA course since 2008, and I've got various other certifications over a period of time. Now, this is a broad agenda we would like to cover. Our theme of this workshop is all-purpose tool for digital trust professionals, how COBIT could be used. And we are going to have this presentation in 4 parts. First, we'll look at COBIT, flashback, and my experiments in using COBIT since over 25 years. And then look at the second part, where we'll cover the COBIT principles, philosophies, and the publications. And the third part, we'll have a walkthrough of the COBIT publications and the templates, and I'll demonstrate to you how you can navigate, select, and customize COBIT content as required by you. And the last part, we'll look at some practical application of COBIT 2019 with some case studies. This is broadly what I would like to cover. I'll take up questions at specific intervals. Maybe let's say at each part, when I complete the first part, I'll have some time for questions. Like that for each of the 4 parts I'll have, and in the end, maybe we'll have about 10 to 15 minutes for questions. Why do professionals require a set of tools? Now, if you look at any professional, whether it's a plumber or a carpenter or a doctor or a chartered accountant or an architect, every professional has a set of tools. For example, if you look at, let's say, a constable has a tool, which is a lathi. Now, similarly, if you look at the higher grade, let's say an inspector may have a pistol as his tool, whereas you look at a soldier, he may have a gun as a tool. Whereas if you look at commando, he may have a AK-47 as a tool and various other tools. So every professional has a tool. Now, the important thing is, how do you develop skill set to use this tool? I was speaking to a famous cardiologist from Dubai when I went to Dubai last time. And I was just chatting with him. He's a famous surgeon, cardiologist, who does specialize in this cardiology, and asked him that how does he do it? What is the secret? He said, my secret is very simple. We just cut and stitch, which means he uses a set of tools and he knows which part of the heart to cut and then stitch. And he says, that's what my job is. Now, the skill set is in knowing how to cut and stitch. As a chartered accountant, we have got various types of skill sets. Now, we should know how to use these type of tool sets as required. Now, COBIT is a very important tool for professionals, especially for digital trust professionals. Who is a digital trust professional? I'll come to it a little later. Now, what is important is, as a professional, if you want to ensure that you're able to deliver value, you are able to enhance your productivity and do more, you should know how to use the right set of tools. Even if you look at a simple mechanic who has to repair a 2-wheeler or 4-wheeler, he has a set of tools and he knows what type of tools to use for what purpose. Now, we need to ask, as an IS auditor, as a chartered accountant, what are the type of tools we have, and do we know how well to use the tools? Depending on the type of skill sets we have in using these tools, we can gain mastery and expertise in our profession. Now, in this workshop or presentation, I'm going to focus on how COBIT can be used as a tool for professional growth. Now, let's get started and look at what is digital trust and digital trust professionals, because these are some fundamental concepts. Digital trust is a new concept which has been promoted aggressively by ISACA. Digital trust, they say, is the confidence in the integrity of the relationships, interactions, and transactions among suppliers or providers and the customers or consumers within an associated digital ecosystem. In short, for me, Every enterprise nowadays is a digital enterprise. Any tech, any enterprise which uses technology as the base of foundation requires digital trust. Who are the people who require digital trust? Any stakeholder who deals with the enterprise requires digital trust. For example, if you are a customer of the bank, you want digital trust from the bank. What does digital trust mean? Which means you deposited an amount, you know that amount is safe and secure. You're doing a transaction, you know that is safe and secure. You have kept that amount in your bank and you know that is safe and secure, and you can retrieve that information as and when required. Not only that, people who are not authorized should not be able to access this information. I remember long back I had visited Singapore and I saw an advertisement and it said, "In God we trust, rest pay cash." Now, I think as far as digital trust is concerned, this is a fundamental premise for any enterprises which uses technology. Now, who are digital trust professionals? In my opinion, digital trust professionals are creative problem solvers who have to use this technology with the relevant frameworks as required, and they need to adopt the right mindset and use the relevant skill sets by using appropriate tools. Now, who could be working in this digital trust profession? It could be the professionals who are working in assurance, security, governance, risk, privacy, etc. Which means any professional who has to deal with technology in any way, whether it's an IT implementer, whether an IT assurance provider, whether it's providing IT security, IT governance, dealing with IT risk, compliance, or privacy, is a digital trust professional, which means this professional is facilitating or enabling digital trust in the enterprise. You look at any enterprise, for example, let's say you take up an e-commerce shop. For doing any transactions on any e-commerce site, one of the first things you require is that you need digital trust, which means when you know that you're doing transactions on the digital trust and you are entering credit card or you are entering the bank details, you know that the integrity of this information is maintained, and the bank is able to, the e-commerce service provider is able to ensure that this transaction is correctly and completely done, and they're able to fulfill their side of the bargain, which means they're able to ensure that the goods and services are delivered to you. Not only that, they have processes and systems which are enable you to monitor the complete ecosystem of the transactions throughout the life cycle, right from its initiation to its completion, plus also providing you a dashboard of all the type of transactions which have happened. So if you ask yourself, are you a digital trust professional? So the answer most probably is yes, because if you are in governance, you are in assurance or security or compliance, risk or privacy, or a regulator or any stakeholder who is facilitating or anyway involved in using technology, then you are a digital trust professional. So it means every professional working in INT areas is in some way facilitating digital trust. They said there are three skill sets required for every professional. One is the mindset, second is the skill set, and third is the tool set. The most important thing in using any framework is the mindset. Let me tell you a story. A young boy was sitting below a mountain and was contemplating how to climb the mountain. He was thinking of the risk and the benefit of climbing the mountain. At that time, he found a senior citizen, more than 60 years old. He was climbing down the mountain, happily singing as he was climbing down. So this young man went to him and asked him, "Sir, I'm just thinking of climbing this mountain. How is that you are able to, at your age, able to climb this mountain?" And it seemed that old man smiled and said, "Young man, you need to send your mind first, then the body will follow." So the most important factor in ensuring digital trust is that not only the skill set and tool set, you also need to have the right mindset that we are facilitators of digital trust. Now, if you are in IT audit, it's very important that you should know how to use the required framework. If you are in IT compliance or governance or risk or any area related to technology, You need to use the right tool set, and one of the most important tool sets is COBIT. How to use COBIT? What are the content in the COBIT? We are going to discover as we go on. What are digital trust and tools? They say digital trust is given to companies. Now, digital trust, if you remember, is not something which you can buy. Digital trust is what you gain over a period of time by ensuring the correctness, completeness, and the integrity of the transactions in all your dealings with the customers. Digital trust is given to customers, companies who have shown their users they can provide safety, privacy, security, reliability, and the data ethics within their online programs or devices. Which means whatever be the devices through which you interact with the company assures the digital trust. And this is what is most important factor in ensuring that you are able to gain and retain customers. When a person decides to use a company's product, they're confirming their digital trust in the business, which means if you are buying anything online or you're doing transaction online, you have a digital trust. Only then you are able to do the transactions. Suppose there is an e-commerce service provider who is not able to guarantee the safety or he's not able to provide digital trust, you find soon they will be out of business, which means the companies who are going to stay in online are companies who are providing digital trust. Now you know that nowadays you take away technology, the enterprises ceases to exist, which means every enterprise is a digital enterprise. So every person who is involved, every stakeholder who is involved within the company is a digital trust professional. What is a tool? A tool, they say, is an object that can extend an individual's ability to modify features of the surrounding environment or help them accomplish a particular task. I remember long back when a tree falls down, and now we had to call the corporation. They will come and then manually they'll put a team of 5 to 6 people and they will hack the tree into pieces. And then after that, they'll take the tree pieces and the tree will be cleared. Now, this would take anywhere between 4 to 6 hours. Now the corporation team has expanded in using the tools. Now when a tree falls down, you call a team, they come with a truck, and the truck also has people, and there are only 2 people who sit with their automatic sawing machines, and they cut and hack the tree within about 30 minutes, and the tree is cleared, which means even the government entities have learned how to use the tools. As a professional, earlier we using calculator. So if you take a simple example, we are using manually calculators to compute a balance sheet or a trial balance, etc. Now we know with computers to maintain accounts or to do anything, it becomes very, very simple. So the computer is the most effective tool we are using. Now, if you look at further, and understand the heart of COBIT. The heart of COBIT is in the C, which is the control. In fact, COBIT was called as Control Objectives for Information and Related Technologies in the earlier avatars. Only later on, I think about 3 or 4 editions later, it was changed. The name acronym COBIT became the standard, and the control objectives for information related technology, that expanded name was dropped because COBIT expanded beyond controls to include management practices, and also it began covering aspects pertaining to governance, not only pertaining to assurance, but also pertaining to governance, risk, and various other areas. But the fundamental theme, the underlying theme of COBIT is control. I remember an advertisement which I saw in Singapore, a one-page ad of a beautiful car, and top of that car was written, "In life, control is everything. Lose it, your history." I just remember a beautiful car, and you're able to get it 80% discount, and they say the only hurdle is that this car has got a manufacturing defect because which the brakes will not work 0.0001% of the time. Now the question is, and they say you have to give a guarantee that you will not hold the company responsible for this. Now the question is, all the features are intact, but the only thing is the brake system doesn't work by 0.0001% based on the statistical analysis. Now the question to ask is, will you buy this car at 80% discount? And even if you buy it, will you be able to use it effectively to its power? For example, the car can zoom from 0 to 100 in a few seconds. Now, will you drive it at 60 kilometers, 80 kilometers, 30 kilometers, 20 kilometers? First of all, will you buy this car at all? Why? Because the control is missing. Because you cannot guarantee that the brakes will work when it's required. So that's why they say the control is most important in implementing information technology. What is control all about? They say control refers to the policies, procedures, practices, and the organized structure. Now, if you look at the four key terms here, policies refers to what is laid down by the senior management, procedures is what is laid down by the middle management, and practices are what is done by the operational management. And the organized structure is what they set up in terms of providing the authority and the responsibility in terms of who can do what and what is their authorization or authority to execute the job. For example, in a bank, an officer has a particular authority to sanction loans up to, let's say, 50,000. A manager has got authority to sanction loan up to, let's say, 10 lakh rupees. A general manager has got authority to sanction loans up to 1 crore. Similarly, in the case of purchase manager, depending on his designation and the level, they may have certain authority in terms of what they can do or what they can execute. So control refers to all these factors. You have the policy, procedures, practices, and the required organized structure. And this has to be designed. This is not available by default. These are designed with two purposes. One, to provide reasonable assurance on what are the two aspects: business objectives are achieved and undesired events are prevented or detected and corrected, which means the primary purpose of keeping the controls in the car or the braking system in the car is to ensure that you reach your destination safely and securely, and you avoid accidents as you drive. Now, compliance is important, but nobody uses the car to ensure that when I am driving, I will ensure that traffic rules are complied with. Now, my objective when I take out the car is to ensure that I reach my destination. While reaching my destination, I want to drive the car safely and securely so that accidents are avoided and the traffic rules are compliant. And that's why the orientation of COBIT is all about business, which is at the center of COBIT. B stands for business. So the business orientation is one of the most important factor which is there in COBIT. In anything you implement, you always ask the question, is it relevant for the business? Is it valuable for the business? Now, COBIT is nothing but a collection of best practices which can be implemented in any organization. You need to learn how to navigate, select, and customize the content from COBIT, which means you need to extract the relevant contents, customize as required. When you customize the content, one of the primary questions you ask is, by implementing it, what is the cost benefit analysis? Do I gain? What is the benefit? Based on the benefit, you will decide whether to implement or not. Now, COBIT in its earlier avatar was said to be a collection of best practices, and this is focused on controls now, which has enhanced to include management practices and then two activities. Now, control, if I have to take an example, is like the nervous system in the COBIT, which pervades all over the various aspects of best practices or the prescriptive suggestions in COBIT in various areas. I'll show you practical example of this as we go on. Now, before I get into my first part of the presentation, which is COBIT flashback, and this what all I gave so far is an introduction. Now, before I get into the first part of the presentation, which is COBIT flashback and my experiments, I'd like to give an analogy, a story. I want to take you to Mahabharata, to the war of Kurukshetra, when the armies are all facing each other. Arjuna, in the midst of the battlefield, asks Krishna to take him to the front of the battlefield so that he can see the armies of the enemies and he can decide who are the people whom he has to face or who has to kill to win the war. When he goes and faces this and he sees there are his elders, his gurus, and various other people, and he sees the numbers, Arjuna panics and then he drops his bow and arrow and tells Krishna that he'll not fight. This part one of the story. This, let us freeze the screen. Now let's go to another place, which is a palace where King Dhritarashtra is sitting with Sanjaya, one of his associates, and then Sanjay has been blessed with the Divya Shakti, which means he can see what's happening in the battlefield and inform Dhritarashtra as to what is happening. Now, Sanjay is seeing this particular scene and describing to Dhritarashtra. Now, if you look at this, there are four actors in this scene. In the first part of the scene, we had Krishna and we had Arjuna. In the second part, in the palace, we have Dhritarashtra, King Dhritarashtra, and Sanjaya. Now you find after this, Krishna starts the Bhagavad Gita advising the 18 chapters and gives various types of advice. Arjuna keeps on asking doubts and clarifications, and then based on that, finally, Arjuna decides to fight the battle because he's convinced that's the right cause. What I want to ask you is, while Krishna was giving the Updesha or the advice in the Bhagavad Gita, there are four players here. One is the Krishna and Arjuna, and then Dhritarashtra and Sanjaya. What type of listeners are these four people? If you analyze, now many of us are attending all these online Zoom seminars. Now we have the screen in front and we're looking at the mobile, we're interacting with this. So it's going on in the background. Now, if you want to get the best benefit from any online seminar, especially in this type of a workshop where the content is dense and very, very important to capture all the points, it is very important that you are the right type of listener. Now, let's see who is the right type of a listener here. Now, if you look at Dhritarashtra, he is a negative listener. He is not interested in what is happening in the battlefield except to know that his sons are winning the war. So all the Upadesha of Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita goes above his head. Doesn't absorb anything, or is not interested in listening to that. He gets more and more impatient and say, why don't we start the war and see that my son inform me how well my sons are doing the war. So this is a negative type of a listener. The second type of listener is Sanjaya, who is a passive listener. He is only listening for the purpose of passing this information to Dhritarashtra. He is doing this as a job. Now, if you look at Krishna, Krishna is listening to Arjuna to understand his problem and provide solution. So Arjuna keeps on asking questions and Krishna keeps on giving the answers to the solutions. So Krishna is an active listener. Similarly, if you look at Arjuna, Arjuna is also an active listener. In fact, he's the most effective listener because he not only listens, he understands, assimilates, and asks questions so that he can broaden his understanding and he can assimilate his understanding. So Arjuna is an active listener. So similarly, in this online workshop, you should know what type of a listener you are. What is the best type of listener you should be? Ideally, you should be an active listener. I hope all of you are active listeners. Let's get going. Now, let me just quickly walk through my experience of using COBIT. I have been using COBIT since more than 25 years. Like I said, COBIT has evolved to become an effective enabler that harnesses and leverages the power of technology to meet enterprise goals. We have witnessed the information revolution, which means the technology has transformed the way business are run, and all this enabled by technology. Now, you take up any enterprise worth the name, remove the underlying technology, you find the business ceases to exist. For example, you take up a hospital, you take up a hotel, you take up an airline industry, or you take up any service industry, you remove the technology, and then you find the business comes to a standstill. Let's take up an e-commerce service provider. If the technology fails, then the business stops. If in an airline you find the technology fails, you find the flights cannot take off. They cannot check in any of the passengers. Most of the cases, you find technology has become the key enabler for enterprises. Now, when technology has become a key enabler for enterprises, it becomes fundamentally important to ensure that this technology is in control, which means it delivers what it's supposed to deliver safely and securely. Now, COBIT, the beauty of COBIT is that it is always kept ahead of this technology, and you find that every 4 to 6 years, a new version of COBIT comes in, which can be used for the latest technology. For example, at the end of this presentation, as a part of the case study, I thought we look at how COBIT could be used for, let's say, Chat GPT, which is quite a lot in circulation, or let's say, how can COBIT be used for business continuity planning or security? That we know. Can you use COBIT for, let's say, artificial intelligence? Can you use COBIT for blockchain? We'll also look at some of these as a case studies as we go on later. Now, because COBIT has been evolving and kept up to date, you find that COBIT has always maintained its relevance. And that's what I call as a continuous evolution. So COBIT has been continuously evolving to ensure that it's relevant and useful for practitioners and implementers. Let's go further. What is COBIT all about? COBIT is nothing but a knowledge repository with the main theme. If you look at the mantra of COBIT, they say IT is complicated, IT governance doesn't have to be. Now, information technology is implemented by information technology professionals, but IT governance or information technology governance is done by the management at various levels of the enterprise. It is not necessary. These IT governance professionals should know the mechanism or the mechanics of how technology works, but they should know exactly how to implement this technology to derive business value. And that is where they should be able to drive the business. For example, governance is like the captain of the ship, which decides the destination and ensure the ship is moving towards its chosen destination. COBIT is the de facto framework of choice for both the professionals and the enterprises. And if you have to remain relevant and add value, this is the framework which is extensively used. Recently, I told you I did a training for this bank in Cambodia, and they had this training of COBIT for 3 days because they had a consultant, which one of the big four firms, and the consultant came in to review what is the governance framework, and they used COBIT. Based on COBIT, they gave 99 findings of what are the areas of improvement. Now, this particular team, the bank set up a team and they wanted to implement these recommendations. Now, for implementing the recommendations, they first of all wanted to know what COBIT is all about. And that's why they had this 3 day training to understand what are the COBIT philosophy principles and how we can use it. And that's where I conducted this particular training for them to demystify and simplify COBIT. If you look at COBIT in its simplest avatar, it's a knowledge repository of best practices. What is best practices? These are practices by professionals from all over the world. It's a holistic approach for governance and management of enterprise IT. And it has the right blend of processes and the practices to ensure that the technology is effectively driven to ensure that business achieves its objectives and undesired events or risks are mitigated. So it seamlessly integrates technology infrastructure into the business process fabric. Whatever the business you're performing, you should ensure that the technology is integrated. Not only that, you have the right processes and controls. Long back when I started the use of COBIT in 1999, I contributed a case study of COBIT because as a firm, at that time I was in practice. We had a firm called Abdul Rafeq and Associates, and I used COBIT extensively for doing various types of assignments from some of the top companies, and I was able to compete with the Big Four and provide this professional service. And how did we use COBIT? I contributed a case study to ISACA on how we use the various COBIT publications for providing various types of assurance services. We also did a COBIT compliance review for Infosys for the software. At that time, it was called Bank 2000. Now it's called Finacle. So what we did was we picked up the relevant contents from COBIT, which were relevant to security and access, and also pertaining to the pros and methods, based on which we prepared a benchmark which was customized for banking based on the rules and regulations of the Reserve Bank of India. And then we prepared a benchmark, and then we applied that benchmark to look into the software, the related controls which are there in the software, and identified what are the areas of weaknesses. They mitigated these particular weaknesses by implementing additional controls, and based on which we issued. This is one of the first exercise of how we applied COBIT. In fact, I contributed, and I was invited by ISACA to make a presentation at the international conference and how I had implemented or customized COBIT for issuing a compliance certificate. Based on my COBIT compliance certificate, I think there are other firms, some of the big four firms also started issuing certificates. Because Infosys used this COBIT compliance certificate, they made a white paper about 12 pages to demonstrate, okay, how software, their own software has all the required controls, and this complies with the best practices issued by ISACA based on a global framework of COBIT. I also wrote an article, a blog, you can say, My Journey of Control Objectives for Auditors to Governance and Management, which was published by ISACA. Here I've said how I started using COBIT. After 2 decades, I can still say with a firm conviction that COBIT has empowered me to remain relevant and add value in all my assignments. I have used COBIT for various types of multiple assignments, whether it's a small client or a large client, because COBIT gives you a collection of best practices. In fact, to give you a story, when I was going through the 99 findings or recommendations by one of the big four firms, and as they did the training, we started using various processes. I told them, and I also found, see, why 99? I can give 999 recommendations because there are so many collection of best practices in COBIT. The only question is, when you want to implement these recommendations, you should know how to navigate and pick up what is required, and you should also know how to customize them. And if you know how to do it, you pick up any enterprise worth the name, you find you will be able to add value because you can find out areas of improvement. Now, is COBIT complex or simple? It depends on your perspective, whether it's read, understood, and implemented. Quite often, you find because of the enormity of the content which is there in COBIT, when you start reading COBIT publications, you don't know where to get started because it has a lot of principles and philosophies. But what is fundamentally important is what are the content which you can use. And that's what I'm going to focus on in the later part of the presentation, where I'm going to take you through all the philosophy, then practically tell you how to pick up. And this is a secret which probably you'll have to spend about $10,000 to learn. I'm going to share the secret which I've been using since the last more than 2 decades. So if you look at basic concept about COBIT is, they say COBIT is codified common sense. This is one of the word which is used by one of my mentors in the COBIT team called Gary Hardy. He was one of the persons who was involved with COBIT right from the first edition of COBIT. He said ultimately you look at what a COBIT is, it's nothing but codified common sense, which means this is a common sense which is adopted by various professionals in IT for ensuring that the right level of controls are implemented. What COBIT gives you is it structures and provides this information in a systematic way so that it can be used. COBIT can be customized and adopted. This is the most important thing. If you're an expert professional, what is important is you should know how to customize and pick up the relevant content. We are also asked to contribute a photo of COBIT implementation based on the landscape. And this is what I contributed from the Bangalore Palace. And I also used to write tips on and tweet them. And this is what I said: get the right fit of COBIT landscape to enterprise landscape, which means you pick up what is there in COBIT. You need to fit it to the COBIT landscape, the business, the organization structure, the compliance and IT. So COBIT has been made in a generic way so that it can be implemented in any enterprise. But what is important is you need to ensure that you supplement it with the required regulatory compliances and the technology compliances, depending on the type of technology which is used by the enterprise. This is also another tweet I gave in. The critical success factor of successful implementation is in knowing the why before the what. Now we know how. Now before I cover the know-how of COBIT, it's also very important. The basic mantra of using COBIT is you should know why before the know what. If you know why you want to use COBIT, because fundamentally it's all in the perspective why you are using COBIT. Depending on that, you can most effectively customize the COBIT contents. Now this completes the first part of the presentation. I would like to know whether we have any questions or I can proceed further. Do we have any questions?
Sir, please proceed. If there is any question, we will put it on the chat window.
Okay. Now I talked about the three types of listeners. I hope all of you are active listeners. And if you got any doubt, you can make a note. We can also come back to it in the end. We can also answer it online. One of the most important factors in using COBIT is, let me give you an analogy. I'd gone to Niagara Falls. I'm sure most of you would have been knowing about the Niagara Falls. Is one of the 7 wonders of the world. And if you look at Niagara Falls, you go and visit. You stand near the the road. You find the Niagara Falls, millions of liters of water falling down, and you find it's a magnificent sight. Now this is one view of the Niagara Falls. Now same thing, after some time We went into a restaurant which was nearby, and in the closed AC restaurant, we are seeing the Niagara Falls. Now, here, the view and the perspective of the Niagara Falls is completely different. The third time we said, let's look at Niagara Falls from the tower. There is a tower, and from the tower we could see the Niagara Falls. Now this gives you a completely different view. Next time when I went to Niagara Falls, I said, let me go through a helicopter and see how Niagara Falls looks. So I went on a helicopter ride to the Niagara Falls, and I could see the origin and how the Niagara Falls flows right from its beginning to the end. And I was seeing from the, let's say, 5,000 feet or 10,000 feet like that. And this is one more view of this one. Now, next time I went, because I went so many times, because my core brother is there in near Toronto. So every time I went, I had to go to Niagara Falls. This time I said, I want to go in the boat. The boat takes you right to the edge of that particular where the water is falling, and they give you the suits also to ensure that you're protected. But you find the water keeps on flashing on your face as the boat gives nearer and nearer, and your heart keeps thumping higher and higher. So this is a completely different view of Niagara Falls. Now, why did I give this example of the Niagara Falls? The reason I gave you this example is, for any aspect, it's very important that you get the right perspective. And depending on the type of the perspective, you will get the experience. For example, the experience of Niagara Falls from a helicopter is completely different. And that is the view of the senior man from a governor's perspective. Okay, the experience of the auditor is like seeing the view from the Canada, from the Toronto Tower, where I could see the falls. Okay, so it's an external view, completely independent. I just come at the end and do a postmortem of what has happened. Now, if you look at the IT implementer who's day in and day out using technology, his perspective is like the person who is sitting in the boat. Now, if you look at a user, the user is like the person who's standing near the road and looking at the Niagara Falls falling on him. Now, if you look at a customer, the customer view is like the person who's sitting in the restaurant nearby in the AC room, and he is getting a view of the Niagara Falls. So the technology, the Niagara Falls is same, but the different stakeholders view it from different perspective. Similarly, COBIT, when you want to use it, you should know what is the perspective from which you are using. It said once a famous sculptor was asked, what is the secret of his success? How is he able to carve such beautiful statues? It seemed the sculptor said, there is no secret. When I see a piece of stone or marble, I see the statue inside, but others are not able to see. So I bring the piece of statue or marble, use my tools, and remove the unwanted parts. Once I remove the unwanted parts, the statue emerges from the stone or the marble. My question to you is, where was the statue? The statue was not in the stone. The statue emanated from the mind of the sculptor. The sculptor is one who set the statue in the stone or the marble. He removed the unwanted parts, and that's where the statue emerged. Now, how do I apply this analogy to COBIT? In the COBIT is like a collection of best practices. It's like the marble or the stone. As a user, you should know how to carve out or pick what is most relevant for you and using it. For doing that, it's important we also know or have an understanding of what are the principal philosophies and the various publications of COBIT. One of the perspective they say is you can have an architect perspective or an engineering perspective. These are two different things. An architect perspective is very important because he creates twice, once in his mind and second in paper. The engineer, based on the specifications by the architect, completes the construction. So the most important thing, the fundamentally important thing is first ensure that you are able to architect what you want. And this is where, as a professional, you need to know what is that you want to be known for, what makes you unique, what value can you deliver, and what are the capabilities which are inimitable to you. What is your mission as a professional? What's your vision? Now, if you have a proper vision and a mission that you want to be a specialist, especially in providing services related to digital trust, that's in the areas of governance, assurance, risk, security, control, or even simple assurance services, you want to provide better assurance with greater assurance, then you need to know how to use the right frameworks. or the right tool sets. And COBIT is an excellent framework or tool which can be used for any of these purposes depending on what you want to do with it. In fact, my career has been example how I have been able to use COBIT extensively and provide various types of services for enterprises, not only in India, but internationally. Professionals are knowledge workers. If you're not a knowledge worker, if that particular task which is being done can be automated, 100% is going to get automated. In fact, I remember I was doing a 3-day training on COVID for information security for Wipro, and at the end of the second day, the information security manager, the CISO, came to me and asked him, is there a tool available where I can customize COBIT for security? I told him, sir, it is not possible to have a tool because the tool only can give you the basic information. If you want to implement COBIT for information security, you need to have the domain expertise. You need to know what is the information security of the enterprise. You need to understand the business processes. You need to understand the information security policy. Only then you can customize COBIT. So what is important is the knowledge you have, which is going to complement you in using COBIT. How to learn COBIT? Now, it's important that we need to know the concepts so that we can move to the practice. It's not just the tools, but also the text, which is the contents. It's not just about the techniques, but also about the content. We need to focus on practical usage. One of the best ways of learning COBIT is pick up a small area. For example, let's say I want to use COBIT for data privacy. How can you use COBIT for data privacy? How do I select the content? I'm also going to cover this content as we go into the last part of the presentation. So it's best to learn from a practical perspective. It's like learning swimming. If you want to learn swimming, hundreds of hours of lectures will not help, but a few hours in the pool will definitely help with the right guidance. Now you need to focus on application which provides value, not on just in getting the certification. There are few certifications which are available, not many people go for COBIT certification. COBIT is not about using ready-made templates, but also about the principles or what is the value you derive from it. You need to know how to select and customize, not only from a micro perspective, but also from a macro perspective. You remember the view I told you about the Niagara Falls. Now you need to get into specifics, which means what does COBIT mean for the enterprise for a specific process. For example, let's say an enterprise wants to improve its procure to pay process. How can I customize and apply COBIT in that particular business process for the area of business, considering the technology which is being used, considering the organization structure they have, considering the security policy of the organization, and considering the compliance
Rafiq
that are
sir,
applicable.
Rafiq sir, just sorry to interrupt you. There are some
Yeah.
questions coming up which might interest you. If you go to the chat section and go to the comment section, you will see the questions which are coming up.
I'll come to that. I think I'll finish the second part and then I'll take it.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay, yeah, because I want to complete to bring this to a logical close. Yeah, so what we ultimately get from COVID is actionable insights which you can implement. It's not just about the knowledge but the skills. You remember, if you take up a collection of data, the data by itself is not useful, but you are able to organize this data meaningfully, that becomes information. And if this information is put to use for a particular purpose, it becomes knowledge. And this knowledge, when it's internalized, it becomes wisdom. Now, in the use of COBIT, what COBIT provides you is information, which means information which has been related, organized based on specific processes. Now, you need to convert it to knowledge by applying it to a specific business process area as applicable. And as you master and implement COBIT, you find COBIT becomes your part of your wisdom. And it's not just about actions, but about decisions which are taken. Understanding COBIT to the right perspective, this is what is important. I said not just the helicopter view, but you need to know how to dive deep down to pick up what you want. I give the analogy of an eagle which is flying, let's say, high above the skies. Now, when it feels hungry, it just navigates the landscape and identifies what are the type of meal it wants, whether it wants a fish, whether it wants some other animal, or whatever it wants, or based on what is available. Okay, so based on the choice, whether you'd like to look at what is already available or it keeps flying further and see, okay, I want a particular meal, I want a particular prey, and then it keeps flying, and from the top it identifies what it wants, and then based on that it's able to dive deep down, pick up what it wants, and then keep flying, eating the meal on the way. So in using COBIT, it's important that you need to have not only horizontal exposure, which means you need to know the breadth, but you should also know when required, you need to have vertical expertise, which means you need to know how to dive deep down into specific process and pick up the relevant contents. For example, in this training which I was doing for the bank, one of the important aspects which this bank wanted was they wanted to implement process for benefit realization. So if the bank wants to implement technology from a benefit realization perspective, first of all, I should know what is meant by benefit realization. Second, I should know what is the benefit of benefit realization, which means what is the purpose served, what the value will get by implementing the benefit realization. Next, I should know what are the goals and metrics I can set for this process of benefit realization. Next, I'll get into what are the practices which I need to implement. In the practices, COBIT gives you 7 areas, that is the 7 components. I'll show you a little later when I go to the COBIT publications. So you should know, okay, what are the content, what are the practices, what are the activities, and how can I implement it? And that's what is important. So not just structure, but the architecture. So it means you should know by implementing COBIT, you should have a holistic perspective so that you know I can implement processes throughout the life cycle. And that's the benefit of using a framework like COBIT. Not just the binocular view, but like I said, microscopic view. Not just insights, but also information. And you learn by doing, not just by reading or listening. What are the COBIT sutras of success? So you need to understand, first of all, the vocabulary. I've been using various terms in COBIT. Like I said, components. As I go on, I'll also cover various other vocabulary or glossary of terms. You should know basic vocabulary of what is covered in COBIT. You need to understand the business process, the key flows and the systems, depending on the type of the organization you're using. You need to ensure when you're implementing it, you make it the structure very simple. You need to understand the underlying logic and the flow of what is given in COBIT. And then you need to chunk it down into specific components so that you can use it. And what is most important is you need to get the perspective right. You need to start with the architect perspective and then get down into the engineering perspective and then come to the auditor perspective to check whether everything has been implemented as planned. And that's why the quality principle of PDCA, plan, do, check, act, is very, very relevant or useful for a COBIT implementation project. So it's not a rocket science. This is also one of the words which is used by one of my mentors on COBIT. When we participate in the COBIT meeting, when you're trying to make the COBIT content, he used to say that COBIT is not a rocket science, but it's a codified common sense. How do you apply? Where do you apply COBIT? Now you find that COBIT is relevant and customizable for enterprises, whether large, medium, or small, or it can be used for any sector or industry, any technology or business models. So how does COBIT Knowledge Repository empower knowledge workers or the digital trust professionals? So what is most important is, like I said, COBIT gives you a list of a collection of best practices. So COBIT has that collection. So it means it's a valuable knowledge of different professionals organized in a structured way. So that's what I'm saying here, that you have the collection of best practices, which you can choose and implement. And it can be used by a novice or an experienced professional for complementing and enhancing your skills. In fact, I remember long back when I started the implementation of COBIT for one of the top IT firms, and the person who was supposed to be my, you can call it as the IT manager, who was supposed to facilitate the work of doing the IT audit. And then he began ridiculing and said, no, what is your experience? What is my experience? I got more experience than you. Why should I implement your suggestions? And then I had to tell him it's not about my experience or capabilities and competencies, but about using a framework and applying it to the benchmark for your enterprise in the way you implemented IT and identifying areas of improvement. And then he said, why should I accept your expertise? I got more expertise than you. Then I told him it's not my expertise, but we are using a global framework like COBIT. And we gave him a brief idea of what COBIT is all about. And then he was able to appreciate what COBIT is all about. And then we are able to successfully implement it. And the beauty of this was when this person, IT manager, was posted to another job, one of the first things he did was to call me and asked me how he can implement COBIT in his new job. So where does COBIT knowledge repository focus on? It can be focused on governance, risk management, security, controls, and assurance. So whether you're an auditor, whether you're a control expert, whether a compliance expert, you can use it for specific purposes. So in short, it is a one-stop solution for both enterprises and professionals. How does it help professionals? It empowers professionals by providing a systematic approach, the best practices, and the tools necessary to progress in your career and to add value through your work. Now let's get into what COBIT is all about. They say it's a right-sized governance solution, tailor fit for your enterprise. Now the key word here is tailor fit, which means you should know how to tailor it so that it fits the enterprise. That is where the expertise of the professional comes into the picture. This gives you a quick synopsis how COBIT has evolved from 1996 to 2019. So if you see in 1996, COBIT 1, they focused on more on audit. COBIT 2, the focus went to control. COBIT 3, management practices were added. COBIT 4, you also had IT governance. COBIT 5, the governance of enterprise IT came in. And COBIT 2019, they focus on enterprise governance of information and technology. Why COBIT is important? You remember the B I talked about? It's the only business framework for the governance and management of enterprise IT. You look at any of the reports or the frameworks or the documents issued by the Big Four when they're auditing big companies, especially for SOX compliance, there are two primary frameworks which are extensively used for verifying and validating corporate governance. And one of the first things which is used is COBIT as a business framework. And the second is the corporate governance framework. Now, what are the three key core areas: benefit realization, risk optimization, and resource optimization. These are the three main outcomes which are expected when you implement the COBIT best practices. One of the important factors in COBIT is that it differentiates governance and management. And it says governance is all at the senior management level, at the board level, whereas management is about the execution. In implementing IT, COBIT emphasizes that implementing IT is not a management job, and the role of the governance is not just sanctioning the IT budget, but in ensuring that the use of IT is harnessed and channelized towards achieving the enterprise objectives. So the board of directors should have a framework in place so that they can see how effectively can we use IT to achieve the business objectives. And based on the directions given by the board, the IT management or the management will be able to use the technology as required to achieve the goals as set by the board of directors. What is COBIT and what COBIT is not? This gives you a quick overview. If you want, I'll share the slides. Maybe you can go through this. This is also available as a free download. The COBIT framework is available as a free download. The other publications are available free for members of ISACA. So it is not a tool which can be directly used to build a governance system, but it provides you design factors. I'll come to that a little later. It doesn't give you how to implement. It's not giving you recommendation on how to implement IT. It is not a framework to organize business process. For example, I'm running a BPO. Can you tell me how COBIT can be used? Does it give any ready-made guidelines? No. But from COBIT, you can pick up the relevant processes. And if you're a COBIT expert, you can customize the business process from COBIT and then implement it for the organization. It is not a technology framework, whether you're using Azure framework or whether you're using Amazon, whatever the framework you're using, COBIT is not bothered about the technology framework because it gives you generic principles. It doesn't give you decisions, ready-made decisions that in this case do this, in the case of Y do this. Now it only provides the information where the management has to take the decision. And these are three key aspects we said. Enterprise governance IT should ensure that there is an alignment of IT in business with business, which means when you're using information technology, you know that the use of information technology is helping and ensuring achievement of business goals. You pick up any balance sheet of any company, you find IT is a major area of investment. You pick up any income and expenditure of any large company, you find the expenditure on information technology is a major part of the expenditure. And that makes it fundamentally important that you channelize this investment and expenditure on IT to ensure that the value is derived. And that's why there is a need for business and IT alignment. What is fundamentally we are looking at? In any enterprise, we are looking at value creation. The same principle is used when we are implementing in IT for the enterprise. When I'm investing in information technology or when I'm spending on information technology, does it create value for the enterprise? If I invested X amount of money in information technology for the enterprise, I'm able to get 3x benefit or 4x benefit or what are the benefit as specified. That's what is most important. So these are some of the principles that the top management need to understand whether managers of IT assets are likely to achieve enterprise objectives resilient enough, which means you're able to continue the business despite any impact and manage the IT risk and also recognize the emerging opportunities on how we can use IT. Now you find many of the products have been this one what is it? The commodities of products have become digitized because of information technology. One of the example is, let's say, books. Now we have got audio books. Now you have digital cassettes or tapes. Now they become digital. This one digital. Okay, so many of the products and services which were earlier available as physical products, now they become digital. Now, what is the design of COBIT? It is a set of principles. There are certain components. There are various dimensions. There are goals cascade. You have diverse user perspective, and it also provides you a holistic approach. I'll cover this as we go on because I want to come to the practical aspects and cover the concepts as and when required. Now, this gives you the complete philosophy or architecture of COBIT. Now, we had COBIT 5. When the COBIT 2019 was designed, they took the input from COBIT 5. They took up various standards, frameworks, and regulations. In fact, ISACA gives you in COBIT the complete list of publications which are referenced. You also have the community contribution, which means there are a set of expert reviewers who reviewed the COBIT content and also added more content for this, based on which the COBIT content was prepared. And this is called as the COBIT core model, which has got 14 processes and it's organized into 5 domains. I'll cover this a little later. And now the beauty of this is you can design using the design factors. You can design COBIT for specific purposes. For example, I want to implement COBIT for security, or I want to implement for risk, or I want to use for DevOps, or for small and medium enterprise. I can pick up a specific area and I can pick up COBIT and customize it. There are also some ready-made publications based on specific areas. For example, there's a publication COBIT 2019 for security or for DevOps. So you can tailor the enterprise governance for information technology depending on your requirement or the enterprise requirement. Now, these are the 4 publications talked about. You have the COBIT framework, which gives you the introduction about the methodology and the principles and the philosophy. Then you have the framework and the governance and management objectives. We can say is the heart or the meat of COBIT, which gives you the content to use. The design guide gives you guidance on how you can design the COBIT usage, and the COBIT implementation guide gives you the systematic methodology or the approach. Now, this is an overview of who are the stakeholders who could use COBIT. Now, you find everyone, these are the internal stakeholders. You find most of the people who are involved with IT or the enterprise are given here. And it also tells you specifically what is the role of each of them. If you are a business manager, what is that you can do? If you're an assurance provider, how can you use COBIT? If you're a risk management professional, how can you use COBIT? If you're in board, what can you do? Similarly, from the external stakeholders perspective, you had the regulators, the business partners, and the IT vendors. It also tells you how COBIT can be used by these external stakeholders. So if you look at the key concepts in COBIT 2019, you have got certain principles. You've got the governance management objectives, the goals cascade. There are various components, focus areas, and design factors. I'm going to cover this shortly as we go on. Now, these are the principles. There are 6 basic principles which are used while designing COBIT, and there are certain principles in making the governance framework. Now, this you need to just understand the concept. You're not going to practically implement this. For example, when COBIT content is written, they say, okay, does it provide stakeholder value? And now the content was written in such a way that it includes a holistic approach, which means there's no conflict with other frameworks. And it distinguishes governance and management, and it also gives you a dynamic governance system. And it can be tailored, whatever is given in COBIT can be tailored to enterprise needs. And it gives you end-to-end governance system. Now, if you look at the framework of the governance. You find it's based on the conceptual model, which means it gives you the theory. It's open and flexible, which means you can add content from other frameworks, and it's also aligned to major other standards. For example, let's say if you're using for IT service management, there is the ITIL framework, which can be integrated with COBIT very easily. If you want to implement, let's say, COBIT for information security, there is ISO 27001, which can be integrated under the COBIT content as required. Now, these are the 5 domains I talked about. It's right at the top, the governance domain, which is focused and called as EDM, evaluate, direct, and monitor. And then you have the management objectives, which gives you the 4 pillars. We have the align, plan, and organize, build, acquire, and implement, deliver service and support, and monitor, evaluate, and assess. Now, this is the most important slide of this presentation so far. It gives you the 5 domains, and it gives you the 40 governance and management objectives. This was called as processes earlier. Now, this is called as governance, which means now here you got 5. These are the management objectives pertaining to, these are the governance objectives, which means when they belong to governance, these are called as governance objectives. The first thing is that you need to ensure the governance framework setting and maintenance. Then you need to have a system of benefit delivery. Now you need to ensure risk optimization. You need to ensure resource optimization, and you need to ensure stakeholder engagement. Now, if you want to implement governance within the enterprise, these are the 5 governance objectives which you select. Now, if you're coming to the next one, which is the align, plan, and organize, now there are 14 governance and management objectives, or this is called as the management objectives. Similarly, in the next domain, build, acquire, and implement, you have got 11. And similarly, if you look at the deliver, service, and support, you got 6. And then monitor, evaluate, and assess, you got 4. Totally, it becomes 40. So depending on the need of the enterprise, you will select what you want. Now, just let's look at the example. Now, if I want to use COBIT for risk management, just based on the name itself, I know which of the process I need to select. Now, if I want to implement for risk, I know based on the terminology, I need to select this process, risk optimization. I also need to select the manage risk. These are the basic things. Suppose I want to use COBIT for, let's say, business continuity. Okay, so in that case, business continuity would mean that I need to look at the risk. Okay, next I also need to look at availability and capacity. I also need to look at the change management, IT change management. Okay, this could be the basic things I want to look at. Now, if I want to look at, let's say, data security or data privacy, now on all the 40, I know the most important processes. I'm going to look at managed data. Now, suppose I want to look at vendor management or outsourcing. Now I know there are 3 processes here. I need to look at the relationship I build with the vendors. I need to look at the service agreements. I need to look at the managed vendors. Let's say you're doing a business process outsourcing assignment for a company, and then you'd like to see how you can use COBIT as a benchmark. So what you'll do is you pick up these 3 processes which are there. You look at the content from this, pick up what is applicable for the enterprise. I'll show you through the templates in the last part of the presentation, and then see what is that which is missing in the enterprise or what can be implemented within the enterprise. So the process, if you understand, is very, very simple. Now, suppose the company is going for a software development, which means acquiring a solution, then you know the most important thing is they need to manage the requirement definition, which means they need to decide what are the solution provide. And then based on that, they need to know how do they identify the solution and build that particular solution and implement the solution. You find if there's a problem or incident management, you'll use this manage problems. If you are looking at security, you'll also use the managed security services, and there are 1 or 2 more processes pertaining to security. This just to give a glimpse of how you'll select the relevant processes. There is no enterprise, or you can say most of the enterprise do not implement the COBIT in its entirety. I always give the example that the COBIT processes are like the buffet in a 5-star hotel. Now, when you go to a buffet in a 5-star hotel, depending on the type or the category of the hotel, they may have anywhere between, let's say, 10 to 50 choices. Now, it's not necessary that you taste each and every dish. Depending on your likes, you'll pick up what you want and taste. For example, let's say you have a South Indian Brahmin. He is most important for him is, do you have curd rice? Do you have rasam? And do you have vada? And then do you have rice? And do you have some pickle? Now this becomes the most important for him. gone to various international conferences with my friends, and then I found first thing they're looking at that five-star hotel has got 100 items. Now they first keep looking for, okay, is there a rice, is there a curd, is there a pickle, like that. Similarly, if you're a person who wants like to taste continental, then he keeps searching and looks at, okay, where is that continental food available. Now, depending on the type of the enterprise, depending on the requirement, you'll pick up the relevant processes from here. Now, this I'm giving you a macro perspective. We'll dive little deeper as we go on. Now we have the high level information. I'll come to this a little later. We have the goals cascade, which helps you or gives you a ready-made tool to select the COBIT content. Like I told you, we're just picking from the names. We can also use the goals cascade. We can also use the related components, which means COBIT has got 7 components, 7 areas where the expertise or the best practices are given. Depending on the need, I'll select content from each of the specific area. It also gives you related guidance. For example, I'm using COBIT for information security. Now, I've already implemented ISO 27001. Then I also know which area of ISO 27001 has been already implemented. And only the missing component I can integrate. That's why they say COBIT is like the umbrella framework under which you can integrate or add other frameworks as required. This is one of the important factors for selecting or navigating through COBIT. You have the stakeholder drivers and needs. Why does the enterprise want to use COBIT? Based on that, the enterprise looks at what is the enterprise goals we want to achieve. And based on the enterprise goals, we decide the alignment goals, and then we select the relevant governance and management objectives. I'm going to give a practical demo of this in another 15 to 20 minutes. Now, this gives you the 7 components. Depending on the need, we can pick up the content from here, from any of the 7 components. I'm also going to show you the tool templates from which you can pick. COBIT gives you ready-made tools and templates. Now, depending on any specific focus area, like I said, you can also use COBIT for specific area. Now, there are design factors. The design factors give you information on how to select relevant content based on specific area. There are about 11 areas. For example, depending on the enterprise strategy, I can pick up. Depending on the enterprise goals, I can pick up. Depending on the risk profile, I can pick up the content or design COBIT for the enterprise. So the COBIT content, for example, if I'm looking at enterprise strategy, my strategy could be growth or acquisition, or I'm looking at innovation or differentiation, or cost leadership, or client service or stability. Depending on this enterprise strategy, I may pick up relevant content from the COBIT. You can also look at threat landscape. For example, let's say an e-commerce company or a banking company has a high threat, whereas let's say a manufacturing company may have a lower threat. So depending on that, you can select the COBIT processes. Depending on what is the role of IT, is it in support, is it a factory mode, turnaround strategic, you can also decide what to select from COBIT. Now let's have a quick look at the COBIT publications before I answer the questions. Now these are the 4 publications talked about. Now before I go into the walkthrough of COBIT publications, let's see how we can take up the questions. Yeah, where is the questions?
Good afternoon, sir. Is it okay if I read out the questions?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. So we have one question from Mr. Abbas Khan that given that best practices concept are slightly replaced by the good practices concept, does COBIT need to be more dynamic than ever before?
Now, the nomenclature which are used, best practices, you find COBIT may not be using that at all. In fact, I remember in the COBIT steering committee where I used to participate, we used to have about 8 to 10 meetings of the COBIT steering committee where we used to walk through and discuss the detailed content of COBIT. So the terminology we used to have a lot of discussion on whether you should be used it as best practices or should we call it as good practices or industry practice like that. So it doesn't matter. I use good best practices because I found that is the most commonly accepted term. Okay, it doesn't matter what term you use. What is important is there is a ready-made knowledge repository which is available. Call it by what name you want. Like Shakespeare said, a rose by whatever name you call it still remains a rose. You call it as industry practice or good practice or this one, it still remains this one. But I generally prefer to use best practice because there is a terminology where say I want to be the best. That's how it is.
Thank you, sir. Moving forward, we have a question from Ms. Virali Mehta. In case of joint ventures where multiple partners are involved in processes and it is not possible to access process implemented by every partner in the venture, can we still apply COBIT?
Definitely. For example, most of the cases, if you look at any enterprise, let's take up an e-commerce service provider, okay, or a BPO company. Now you find the BPO company is depending on the IT services for various purposes. They are keeping the data on the cloud for which they have separate service sourcing agreement. Like that, they have got a network of vendors on whom they are relying for providing the particular service. Now, depending on all the services are provided based on a particular contractual agreement. This is called as a service level agreement, which clearly specifies what is the service they are providing, what is the expected deliverables, and what is the performance metric. Now, based on this, COBIT gives you what is called as managed service level agreement, which gives you, let's say, about 10 important factors. In that, one of the things is when you're making a service level agreement, it gives you these are the 10 factors you need to take into consideration. You need to ensure that the service level agreement clearly specifies the deliverables. You have the terms or the pricing clearly specified. You have the deliverables with the timelines which is there. You have the penalty clauses if the service are not delivered. You have the performance metrics which is there. You have the responsibility which is assigned to specific individuals to ensure that these are done. You have the monitoring mechanism which ensures that the services delivery is monitored. Like that, it gives you the best practices. So if you're monitoring a service deliverable from a service from a particular vendor, you pick up what is that the company is supposed to do, look at what COBIT provides, and there could be certain things which the agreement has not specified, which the enterprise is missing. For example, they have got a service level agreement, but they don't have a monitoring mechanism, or they're not assigned a responsibility, or they're not monitoring the performance of the deliverable. Okay, like that, you can pick up specific areas and then give that as a recommendation for the management. You pick up any area of the service depending on the partners. You can pick up this particular area and then do this. For example, there is something on manage vendors. Now, what is the vendor management policy? How does the vendor company manage the vendors? Okay, how does the company select the vendors? Okay, what are the qualities which are expected from a vendor? So it gives you best practice pertaining to the vendor management, and based on that, you can decide how does the enterprise select the vendors, and based on that, okay, what does COBIT specify? What is missing element which is relevant for the enterprise, which implemented will provide value? Then you can pick and add that.
Thank you, sir. We have a question from Shuvendu, sir. Why will
Yeah.
an organization accept COBIT as a framework, considering that there is no statute which makes it mandatory for acceptance?
Yeah, the most important thing, if you look at any framework, it can be implemented from diverse perspective. It can be implemented from a regulatory perspective. Most of the COVID implementation was driven by the auditors, because auditors were the first to use. You remember 1996 when the COVID started, I said the first edition, they were more driven from audit and control in 1996 and 1998. The auditors were the one who were using COVID. Based on it, they used to come with recommendations. In fact, let me tell you a story. I was doing a COVID training for a famous multinational enterprise in Malaysia, and we had designed a one-day training on COVID for various departments. And one of the department which was trained for COVID was IT. So when the department came in for IT, I asked them, why do you want this training? They were saying, we don't know what is COVID. I think maybe it has got IT in the end. So it has something to do with COVID. At the end of the training, okay, when we asked them, what is the value you got of this? Now, they said specifically, we always used to wonder how these auditors who don't have much knowledge of IT are able to find out and ask questions and give recommendations on specific areas of IT, whereas they don't have knowledge of IT. They're specifically able to go to the pain points, the problem areas, and tell me that this is what I have not done. I was wondering how this the audit guys knows this. Then after the training of the COVID, now I know what is the source from which these auditors are able to get the recommendations. Okay, so which means they know they're picking the content from COVID. So first was the audit perspective. Second, many of the regulators were the ones who started using COVID in a big way. So whenever the regulators have to go and do the audit, let's say the finance industry says, no, you have to use COVID, or COVID says that you have to do this. And the third is even regulators, for example, even the Reserve Bank of India, when they used to guide guidelines for the banks on, let's say, outsourcing or any other IT related area, they used to reference COVID. And then because that they said, okay, bank is using COVID, so the Reserve Bank has suggested COVID, then the enterprise start using it from a regulatory perspective. That's the second perspective. The third one is, let's say management finds that they have attended a conference and the enterprise talk about, we have used COVID and that's how we are using it. We are one of the best frameworks. Then that also is one other perspective through which the management drives the governance from the governance perspective, that I'd like to see that my process are streamlined and we would like to implement COVID. Later on, at the last part of the presentation, I'm going to come to the specific reasons why COBIT is implemented. Okay, so there are various perspectives from which COBIT could be implemented, not necessarily from a regulatory perspective because mandated by the regulator. In fact, it's good that it is not mandated by the regulators, because what happens when it's mandated by the regulators, then it becomes only a paper certificate where it said that yes, I complied with this. Like we have this ISO certifications now, many of the cases now, it becomes just like a paper certification. I don't know what I implemented, but I got the certificate. I'm able to satisfy the regulators. I got the paper in place, certificate in place. So what most enterprises look at is what are the benefit or the value I can derive based on which the COBIT is implemented.
Very well stated, sir. I would also like to add to this question, like given your experience, which countries are more COVID proactive country-wise? If you
Now, if
might
you
be
look
able
at
to shed some light on this.
the origin of COBIT is from USA. So you find the COBIT is extensively used in USA. Many of the large institutions use COBIT extensively. For example, the Federal Reserve Bank or the regulatory, the CAG. I'm not sure about the exact name for the CAG, which similar one to the CAG in the US. They use COBIT extensively. And many of the federal bodies, regulatory bodies in the US use COBIT extensively. Many of the financial institutions and the big four consulting firms or the top consulting firm, they use COBIT extensively. Now, in many of the IT companies, they use COBIT extensively. Now, if you look at the next category, I think mostly it comes to Europe and then in Asia. In India also, it has been extensively used, mostly because of the drive by the Reserve Bank of India. Then also CAG trains. In fact, I remember long back in 2000, they used to do a 1 week training, and I also participated in some of the training where they used to do a 5 day training on COBIT for all their auditors. And if you search for CAG and COBIT on Google, you will find a lot of reports issued by CAG, especially when they did IT audit, which talks about how COBIT has been used by them for doing IT audit. So if you look at in terms of the extent of utilization, predominantly you find mostly it's used in the US, second the European countries, and then you also have the Asian countries and also in India.
Thank you, sir. Moving forward, we have a question by Mr. Vijay Chaudhary.
Yeah.
Startups often pivot their businesses. So, how will COBIT be adapted to align IT objectives with the new business objectives midway of the adaptation?
Simple. What is the term you use? Pivot. So
Yes,
what you
sir.
need to do is you need to pivot the COBIT implementation. That's all.
Correct,
Earlier
sir.
doing a
Thank you.
particular business and you're using for a specific area. Now you pivot in different area. Pivot COBIT also into that area.
Thank you, sir. Moving forward, we have a question by Mr. Beriwal. Management is planning to implement a new technology in the existing business process.
Hmm.
How should we adapt COBIT to suggested process changes, which are not already part of the procedures?
Now, what you should look at is, I think first thing I suggest is you have this 40. I think in the last part of this next 30 minutes is going to be very critical. You'll get an idea about the actual content because I'm going to go through the actual content of COBIT. Okay, then I think when I give this, in fact, this here itself, I'm going to get into the walkthrough where you'll get a perspective of, okay, how do I pick up content from COBIT? So you need to select for the particular area you're implementing what COBIT processes or content could be used, and depending on that, you can proceed. I'll take this a little detail when we come to the practical demo.
Thank you, sir. I think we are done with most of the questions now.
Excellent. So, what is important now? Let me just give you one more analogy. It said once a famous person, once a not famous person, a famous person was asked to select between two candidates. Okay. Now they said the HR department said we are not able to choose between the two because both of them seem to have similar type of experience, and we are not able to choose between the two who could be the president because the president was retiring, and they had to select from one of the two vice presidents. The chairman, who was a very senior person, he said, "I'll take them out for lunch. Then after that, I'll give him a decision." He took them out for lunch, and after 1 hour, he came back and said, "Do you please, you can issue the appointment letter to this gentleman." So the HR department is surprised, sir. We have spent so many hours, rounds of interviews, multiple rounds of interviews, talking to these fellows, these two guys, and we are not able to come to a conclusion. How just within 1 hour of lunch discussion we are able to come to a decision? And the chairman said, "It's very simple. We went to the restaurant and ordered soup. Now the soup came in. When the soup came in, the first president, vice president, put salt and pepper and then took the soup. The second person tasted the soup and then put the salt and pepper. Both of them put the salt and pepper. But what did the first person do? Based on his old habits, he thought that soup in that particular hotel will generally not have proper salt and pepper. He began putting it. Where the second person actually tasted the soup, depending on that, he put the right amount of salt and pepper as required. So when you're using COBIT, what is important is you need to see that you put the salt pepper in the right proportion depending on what is required. It's not a tool where you got a hammer, you go finding for a nail. It's important you know exactly how to customize it as required. And the most important thing is what is the value you can provide. Now let me quickly walk you through the publications. So this is a COBIT framework introduction methodology. I'll walk you through this publication. This gives you the concept. And then you have the COBIT governance and management publication. This is a 200 plus page publication. This is the most important publication, which is going to be extensively used. Then you have the governance management objectives. This gives you a detailed explanation for each of the 40 governance and management objectives. And as I said, it's a 5-star buffet. You don't take all the 40. Depending on the need, you prepare, first of all, what is called a statement of applicability. So it means for the 40, you say what is applicable and why it is applicable. If it is not applicable, you say why it is not applicable. Okay, and then decide among the applicable, okay, what is the priority? Let's say you selected from the 40, you selected 10. From the 10, you decide based on the priority, based on the pain points, based on the requirement, which is the process which can give the maximum value, and then you prioritize and decide which process you're going to implement for the enterprise. Process, I mean the governance and the management objectives. The implementation gives you the methodology for implementing it systematically, step by step. Now, these are the steps which are given in COBIT. So you decide what are the drivers, why do we want to implement, then you look at where are we now, and then which means we know the current status, and then look at where do we want to be, which means what is our goal, and then what needs to be done, what are the action we need to take, then how do we get there. You prepare a detailed action plan, you implement it, and then check did we get there. Now most important is when you implemented it, you also want to ensure sustainability. So you look at can we keep the momentum going. So it means you institutionalize the process. What is given in COBIT is not an additional COBIT process. It becomes a part of the day-to-day process. And this is the step-by-step process which is given in COBIT. And this is given from 3 perspectives. One is from the point of the program management, from the change management. Okay, if you're taking it as a project management, how do you initiate the change? And next you can take it as a continual improvement cycle. These are the different dimensions through which you can implement COBIT. Now, there's also performance management, which is built in, which says if you're implementing a process, what the level at which the process is. For example, 0 means it's incomplete. It's 1 means it's initial or ad hoc. Okay, mostly it's person oriented. Second means actually manage, which means you're actually managing that process. Third one means is actually defined, which means you documented that particular process. Fourth means you also have metrics for the particular process. You are measuring how well the performance is being done. And fifth means optimizing, which means you are continually improving that particular process. So any process you implement, you decide at what level of maturity we are. In fact, for the COBIT activities which are given, it tells you for each of them what is the expected level. It is not necessary for every enterprise they should be at level 5. In many of the cases, they could be at level 2 or level 3, depending on the need of the enterprise. For example, let's say in the case of banking industry, many of the business continuity should be, let's say, at level 5. Information security should be at level 5. Similarly, for an outsourcing industry, for the service delivery, okay, they should be at level 4, which means they're not only performing the process, they're also ensuring that it is being managed. Now, continual improvement, depending on the criticality, they may also decide they'd like to go to the next stage. This is also one of the things we decide when you're implementing, because depending on the type of the maturity, the cost of implementation will also vary. Now, this, for example, gives you, now if you look at this is the exact content from COBIT for a particular process. For example, activities, establish a platform to share good practices and capture information on defects and mistakes to enable learning from them. This, they say, is level 2. What is level 2? I said level 2 means it is being managed. Planning and performance measurement take place, although not in a standardized way. Okay, the COBIT says that, okay, you got a platform, this could be level 2. Next one, identify examples of excellent quality delivery processes that can benefit other service or projects. Share this with the service and project delivery teams to encourage improvement. And this, they say, is pertaining to level 3. Identify recurring examples of quality defects. determine that root cause, evaluate the impact and result, and agree on improvement actions with the service and the project delivery teams. This should be at level 3. Now, if you look at the last part, benchmark the results of the quality reviews against internal historical data, industry guidelines, standards, and data from similar types of enterprise. So this is the actual content from COBIT pertaining to quality management. Okay, so you have decided that all these 5 are important. Then you pick up and say, okay, now you convert this as a question. Can you benchmark the results of the quality reviews against historical data? Which means, first of all, you need to ask, do they have historical data pertaining to the review done? Have they used any industry guidelines for doing this? Are they using any standards for doing this? And what is the data they got for similar type of enterprises? So you use this as a benchmark and check whether enterprise hang this benchmark. If the enterprise doesn't have the benchmark, you should be able to find out similar type of benchmarks and give a recommendation to the management. Now, provide employees with training in the methods and tools for continual improvement. So the first question you need to ask is it applicable? You say the answer is yes. Then you ask, is it valuable? By implementing this, will it provide value to the enterprise? You say yes. Then you need to ask, you can convert this as a questionnaire and ask, does the enterprise provide employees with training in the methods and tools for continual improvement? Do they have a process for continual improvement? So then it's not a question of yes or no. You should also be able to have documentation. You should also review and examine the process they perform. Based on that, you can decide your recommendations. So for each of the COBIT content, you can convert it into a questionnaire depending on the relevance and apply it. There's the design factors. Design factors is a complex document mostly used by the Big Four, where you can decide what are the processes which you have got. I'll give you a simpler process for selecting. This is about the design guide. You've got various factors. What are the design factors? Now it gives you the 4 factors. You decide what are the management objective, what are the priority, and what are the target capability like you said, level 3, 4, 5, like that. They decide what are the specific focus areas where you want to implement, and what are the component variants. So from the components, 7 components we have got. Like we have processes, organized structure, policies, principles, and framework. Like that, we've got 7 frameworks. I can decide which one I want to implement, and then I select the content. Now this gives you the 4 steps. In this case also, if you see, when implementing a tailored governance system, they say understand the enterprise context and strategy, determine the initial scope of the governance system, refine the scope of the governance system, conclude the governance system, and design. So it gives you step by step how you can do this. I've written an article on the ISACA website on how to use the COBIT governance. I'll give you a reference, you can check it. Governance system design flow, it explains and elaborates on this process. Now at the end of it, what you should be able to do is you should be able to get this one diagrammatic representation saying which process is critical and what is the rating, and based on that you decide what process you're going to implement. Okay, now before I go to the COBIT public applications, I would like to just show you 2 things. One, let me go to the website. Okay, now let's see. We have got, can I change this itself? Okay, are you able to see my screen here, my email?
Yes, sir, we are able to see your screen.
Now I'm just going to go to the ISACA website. So if you go to the ISACA website and just type my name, now if you see here, there are I think 4 articles. The latest was one on 7 habits of highly skilled digital trust professionals. So here I've tailored a dynamic approach to tailoring governance in the era of digital disruption. Okay, this is where I talked about the COBIT design factors. I've explained in detail how tailoring governance as per the COBIT design factors. Step by step I've explained this one. Next, if I go to the next one, using COBIT 2019 to proactively mitigate the impact of COVID. This is for written the COVID era, where I'm talking about, okay, if you're using COBIT for COVID, okay, so we had COVID 2019 and also COVID-19. Okay, if you're going to use this, what is called as a focus area in the COVID environment, what are this one enterprise? How do I use it? Okay, using the COVID, this is what I said with example. Okay, you have the stakeholder needs. So in the case of COVID, what is the most important thing? Ensuring continuity of business becomes most important. Okay, so I've explained all the 7 components of COVID. There's the processes, organized structure, principles, and said how this could be impacted due to COVID. Okay, then I gave a practical case study of adopting COBIT for COVID. Okay, in this case, I have selected, for example, in this case, okay, what is the process which is implemented? For example, APO 012, APO 013, okay, BA 01, like that. I've selected which are the things, and then I said, how can I apply it for specific areas? Okay, let's look at the third part. Let's say a systematic approach. This is a detail which you can say is a sequel to the article which I showed you, where we actually walk through this jointly written by my friend Narsiman along with Narsiman. Okay, here you see the same thing we used COBIT for mitigating the COVID, and then we gave the steps. Okay, now this is what I said is mapping enterprise goals. This is what I wanted to go you. For example, I know this particular goal is this. Now let me show you the Excel table. Are you able to see my Excel file?
Yes, sir, we are able to see it, but can you please
No, I'm just
maximize
saying
the
how that. Yeah. Now you're able to see this.
Yes, sir, perfect.
Now, if you see here, what happens is, let me just reduce this a little more. Yeah. Now, if you see here, these are the 13 enterprise goals which are there in COBIT. Okay. Now, you said the COBIT is not rocket science. Let's look at a simple example and see. Okay. For example, quality of financial information, compliance with external laws and regulations, customer-oriented service culture, business service continuity and availability. For example, let's say we'll look at business service continuity. In the case of COVID, this becomes most important. Okay, so if you're looking at business continuity environment, now what it gives you is, let's say I put a filter here. Okay, now if I say for this particular process, I want to select which are the processes which are relevant. So what I do is I just go here and select P, which means these are the primary process. It tells me what is most important is to ensure security of information processing, infrastructure, applications of privacy. Okay, this is the enterprise goal I have to select. Okay, similarly, let's say I'm looking at quality of management information. Okay, is there a filter already applied? Yeah. Now let's say I want to improvise. Now, if you see, many of the enterprises are going in for this what is that, reduction of staff. I want to ensure staff skills, motivation, and productivity. Okay, or regulator has given certain this one, or management decides that a regulator has given some this one, that internal auditors has given a complaint saying that our internal policy is not properly followed. I'd like to implement this. The enterprise said this enterprise. So in that case, what I do is I'll go and select P. So in this case, P is primary. Say INT compliance internal policies becomes important. Now, once I've selected the alignment goals, now just remember this AG11. I go to the next chart, AG11. Now here, let me expand this. Now if you see here, okay, this is too big. And now if you see here, AG11, now here also you see there are 13 enterprise goals. Now AG11, if you see AG11, now this talks about AG11, INT compliance with internal policies. What is the governance management objectives I'll implement? So it means I'm going to select what are the from the 40 governance management objectives, what I'm going to implement. So if I pick up the P, now if you see here, for this particular, I started with the enterprise goals. Based on the enterprise goals, I selected the alignment goals. For this alignment goals, I come to the last level. These are the three processes I'm going to select. Manage the IT management framework, manage system internal controls, manage assurance. So I'm going to pick up these three processes. Okay, I may also go through the secondary, which means secondary means maybe some component is there, and then I'll review the content. This is how you can validate. Now I've already selected this. Now remember this, manage IT governance. What is this one process? APO 01. Now if you want to go to APO 01, now let's say I go to practices. This is a ready-made template which is already available in ISACA. You can download it free of cost even if you're not a member. Okay, this you just go to the COBIT section or search for COBIT toolkit, you'll get this content. Now here you say governance, there are 40 management practices, you got 231. Now you remember we are talking about what is this one I was talking about? EG. I was talking about AG11. I'm just taking one as an example. Okay, if I come to the practices, now here if I come here, now let me hide this. Okay, now I've got this. 1 minute. Let's see, area, domain, objective, description. Okay, now here if you see practice ID, it gives you the practices. Now here you got the EDM. Now what did I want to select? I wanted to select, is this what we wanted? APO 011. Now this, no, not APO 11. What is it? AG11. Okay, no, sorry. This is not about age 11. This is about here. Yeah, this APO 001. Okay, now for this one, APO 11 I had. Instead of that, I pick up APO. So this is the content. If I want to implement at this level management practices, so this tells you by implementing this process, what is that manage INT management framework? What is that process covers? What is the purpose? Okay, and then what does the COBIT say? Okay, this is the practice description. This is what I'm going to write here. Okay, what the enterprise has to do. In fact, for the purpose of practical implementation, what I do is I can break this into sentences and use it. And I'll have two questions here. First thing I'll write, is it relevant? Or you can call it as applicable, applies. I'll say yes or no. Then after that, then I'll mark it as relevant, which means for this enterprise, is it relevant? Does it provide value? Okay, so I'll go through each of this. For example, management practices. I got the detailed management practices. Depending on that, I selected. Here, what I did was, I think I selected the. Here we have also got blank. Yeah. Now, if you see APO 01. Now here, if I come to this one, APO 01 has practice IDs 1.01. Below that, I got like this 1.03, 1.05, like that. It has got the content. So totally there are about 11. Okay. So each of this 11, I can select what is applicable, and this is the content I'm going to use. I'll mark yes or no, select the content, and this is at the level of the practices. So what does practice level say? It gives you define, implement infrastructure, service, and applications to support the governance management system. Okay, and it gives you various areas where that can be done. So I can convert this as a questionnaire and ask, okay, are you doing this? If you're doing this, how are you doing this? Can you show me the documents for this? Okay, define the required skills and competencies to achieve relevant management objectives, which means I'm going to say, okay, for the staff, have you identified for each of the type of staff, what are the skill sets which is required, and depending on the type of job required? Have you documented it? How are you ensuring that trained? What is the type of training given? What is the extent of training given? So based on that, I have to take a value judgment whether what is being provided within the enterprise pertaining to improving the skills and competencies or maintaining the skills and competencies is applicable or not applicable. And then based on that, I give the recommendations. Okay, for example, many enterprise, in large enterprise, they say they spend about 5% of their revenue for training the employees. Or in IT company, let's say they spend 5% of their revenue for training the employees. So you can look at that. So this is just an example. Let's say same thing. I'm looking at APS 01. I want to look at the activities. This is a level of activity. Now, if you see, for each of, if you understand the structure, first, if you see, what do I have? First, I have the enterprise goals. Let me see if I can expand this. Yeah. Now, if you see, first I have the enterprise goals. Okay. So how many goals are there totally? 13. Based on the enterprise goals, I select the alignment goals. This also has got 13. Based on this, I can select the practices. No. First, I select the governance and management objectives. How many do we have? Totally, we have got 40. Okay, and then once I've selected this, in this, I select the practices. Okay, or next level, I select the activities. Now, if you look at this one, enterprise goals, I got 13. Okay, next. Now, can I customize this enterprise goals? Depending on the enterprise, I can do it. Governance and management objectives, I got 40. And then we have 231 practices, and we have got 1202 activities. So depending on the enterprise, I select what is applicable. It could be possible, just to give a practical example. Let's say in this case, I have selected 2 enterprise goals. For these 2 enterprise goals, let's say there are 4 alignment goals. For the 4 alignment goals, there are 10 management objectives. Okay, and for that, I found there are, let's say, 42 governance management practices. And out for this 42, I may have, let's say, 243 activities you want to implement. This becomes the benchmark from COBIT, which means from the total collection, I select what I want. From this 243, again, I'll decide, okay, what is applicable, what is not applicable, and then customize as required. Okay, so this is a ready-made tool which is applied. Now, in this case, depending on the see here, this enterprise decided what they're going to do with the different types of this one. For example, here they selected APO 13, like that, selected various things, and based on that, they applied. Okay, this is a template for selecting the governance and management objectives. Okay, let's go further. Now, this is what we said in the example. See, I select this E006, then based on that, I select the alignment goals. Okay, next, based on the alignment goals, I select the governance and management objectives. Okay, and then I select for this. Now I go to the governance and management objectives, which I said this is 40. Now let me see if I can expand this. Yeah. So I select this. Here also there are metrics. I select the metrics which is required, both for the enterprise goals and the alignment goals. And then I have given example about the theory. And then I say in this particular processes, management practices, activities, what do I select? Again, related guidance, what is applicable. And then based on that, I select the practice which I'm going to apply. And then in the organ, this is the second component, which is the organ structure. I said there are 7 components. This is the second one, which is the management practices. Management practices based on the organ structure. The organ structure tells you who is responsible for what. So it gives you from 2 dimensions. One is accountability, second is responsibility. This gives you for each of the management practices. For example, in this DS4, there are totally 8. And for this, in this enterprise, out of 8, 3 are applicable. Okay, from this 3, there is the next one document, which is next component, which is C. Now, if you see here, first one was A, after that we have B. Now, this was A, the component is process. B component process was the organized structures. C component is the information flow and items, which is the documentation. Okay, for each of the process, what are the input document I need to collect? What are the output document I'll generate from this process? Okay, and based on that, next we have D, which gives you the component people skills and competencies. This is minimal. Then you have the policies and procedures, which is component E. In this case, I've selected this. And then F is like selecting from a buffet. Okay, I've gone to a continental section. In continental section, what do I want? Or I've gone to a vegetarian section. In vegetarian section, what do I want? Or in South Indian, I select what do I want. So here in F, what do I want to select? Then after that, we've got G, which is services, infrastructure, and applications. So this is how you can go and select content from what is there in COBIT. Okay, the last part, I think this is the systematic approach. This is a recent article which I wrote, which talked about, there is a famous book called 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I just compared with, okay, if you have to map the habits of highly effective people with, for digital trust professionals, what is that the qualities you need to develop? Okay, this is about the references. Now let's go further. I'm going to close this guy. Okay, let's come further. Let me come to a presentation. Okay, you're able to see my presentation? Yeah, now I just want to give you a quick walkthrough. This is what I said. You got the various publications which is available as a free downloadable toolkit. I could also show you where that is available. I think it's very simple. Where is it? Are you able to see my screen now?
Yes, sir, we are able to see your screen.
Okay, very good. So if I go to this one, just for COBIT 2019 toolkit. See here, COBIT design. So there is a toolkit, COBIT design resources, COBIT design guide. Okay. I think simple, we go to the COBIT section, resources. If I go to the COBIT, now these are all the publications which are there. Okay, now if I go to COBIT, okay, now you got this details, access the COBIT toolkit. Now if you just click on this, it download the toolkit. See, there's a toolkit which is zip file. You download it, you get all this excellent document. The beauty of this American publication is many of the things they keep it free. The same thing if you look at the European publications, they might have charged about $450, 450 euros for this particular document. Whereas now ISACA actually has decided to give this document in a freely usable template. And that's what I had been arguing with them quite a long time. And finally they agreed. And they have provided this complete COBIT content pertaining to the content of COBIT in a which you can readily use. Now just give you a quick idea about the framework. Okay, this is the COBIT governance management objective, which is about 300 pages. Okay, there's one person, John Leinhardt. He passed away. He was there right from the beginning of COBIT. Now this gives you the development time. You also find my name as one of the expert reviewers. You'll find here there are so many people. I was one of the reviewers of COBIT. Like that, there are expert reviewers from all over the world. Then you have the table of content, and this gives you various things. Now the important thing is, now if you see here, this gives you the same theory. Some of the things from COBIT is given. So what is most important is, see, this is what you got, this 40 governance management objectives. And then it gives you the content for each of the 40. I'll just quickly go through this. It gives you the structure, how the COBIT is structured, all this about the theory. Now let me go specifically to one particular process. Now here, see, this is what I said. In evaluate, direct, and domain, there are 5 governance objectives. Okay, for this governance, these are also called processes earlier. Okay, now if you see here, now this is what I said. It gives you the description, the purpose, then the enterprise goals, then you have the alignment goals, the metrics for each of them, and then it gives you the content. This is the heart of the COBIT. You have the governance practices, okay, the metrics, the activities with the capability levels. Now similarly, you have this again for the next one, 1.02, like that you got for 1.03. Okay, and then you have the organized structure, which is component B. Then you go to C. So D, E, F. Okay, now G is over, that is over. Now what do you expect for the next one? The beauty of COBIT is, because it's structured in a particular way, you go to the next one, EDM 02, you find it, the content is given the same way. Okay, which means if you understand how the process is structured in one, you don't need to go through the same the other one, because it's structured in the same way. So if you got 3 and 2 pages and only 4 pages are relevant, you don't need to read 3 and 2 pages. Pick up only the content for the 4 pages. For example, each process, there may be 6 to 7 pages of content. Okay, so this is the value of understanding the structure. This is what I said. You should know how to navigate, select, and customize. Like the eagle, you should be able to dive down what you want and pick. Now here, if you see, for the EDM 2.04, you got 2.04, and under that you got the activities. Then you got B, component B. It is not necessary that you select all the 7 components. Depending on the need, you select the components. For example, you want to focus only on documentation, you'll pick up this component and say, okay, in this enterprise, do they have documentation? Okay, if they want to implement this process, what are the documentation do they have? They may call it by a different name. Do they have? Does it give the purpose of the document? Is it produced or shared with all other people? Like that, it gives you the, for example, do they have the policy for this particular area? What does the policy cover? All this description. Okay, this is general guidance for this. Now, if you go to the next process, what do you expect? The same way. It's structured in the same way. Your description, purpose, enterprise goals. After that, you have the content for the 7 components. For all the 40, now if you see here, from, let's say we started from page number 20 to 302, 280 pages, about average 7 pages per each process. So you don't need to read 300 pages. Okay, you don't need to read one more publication which I want to show you. I've already given you the context. There is something called the framework. Okay, this gives you all the story which I talked about in 64 pages. Okay, what are the principles, what are the philosophy, all these things. All this is story about what COBIT is, it, why it was designed, who can use it, implementation guide, all the publications, everything. But fundamentally, what are you going to use? You are going to use the governance and management objectives. Similarly, we have this implementation guide. This gives you the step-by-step how you can use the implementation guide. Okay, you remember I told you about the 7 drivers. Okay, this is not clickable. Yeah. So this gives you explanation for each of this. What is the implementation life cycle? It also gives you example. So this is also publication which is free for ISACA members. Okay, and the last one I just told you is the design factors. What are the design factors? This I found is the complex document. I said it is helpful more for the consultants to make more money. If you have a large enterprise, you want to make COBIT complex, this one implementation complex, you can use this design factor document. Okay, here also you find most of the cases the same thing. It gives you that 4 steps. You remember I gave you in 2 slides. So it gives you that 4, this one. It gives you all the documents. Start with the story of what COBIT is all about. Now this, what are the 40 processes and how you can use the maturity level. These are the 11 design factors. Okay, these are for each of the design factors, they gives you various criteria. Okay, so these are the various publications COBIT, and the beauty is that for ISACA members, all the 4 documents are free. For others, the first document is free, that is framework is free. Let's come back here. Okay, now this I told you, I'm going to give you some examples. Now, if you look at when does COBIT get triggered, when does the enterprise use COBIT? Now, for example, failed IT initiatives. Now, an enterprise has gone for a large IT implementation, they found it has failed. Then the management says, why did it fail? What process went wrong? It might be because of that. Or rising costs. We implemented a particular project, you find the cost of the project keeps on rising. Or we find you implement in a particular IT project, but you find the users are not happy, it doesn't give the value. Or there are significant incidents. For example, in a Malaysian bank, the ATM failed. Then we found customers got a lot of complaints. Immediately they said, no, what is the process missing? Okay, they didn't have a BCP plan complementing the enterprise requirement. Then they implemented that. There are service delivery problems. Like that, there could be various typical pain points because of which they might be implementing, or there could be trigger events. For example, one company has merged with another company, so they would like to ensure that whatever policies are being followed by the large enterprise is implemented by the acquired enterprise, or the shift in the market, or the shift in the way business operate. For example, let's say the COVID, immediately we have to shift from the operating from offices to operating from homes. In that case, now can we use COVID? How can we ensure security of that information? How can we ensure availability of the information? So people learn dynamically how to implement. Now you could have used COBIT also easily for implementing this. Now using COBIT is an art. Why it's an art? I always talk about this in IT audit also. Is it an art or a skill? It's an art because COBIT is quite dense and you should know how to navigate. If there's one important thing which I wanted you to learn from this is that you should know how to navigate. In the mapping table I've given you, if you've still got doubt, I suggest you read the article which I've already given you reference, which is available online. You will be able to know clearly how to navigate, and that is conducted through a 3-day training costing 20,000 rupees. I've given you within 2 hours free of cost. Okay, so you can know how to navigate and pick what content you want and start using it. Read the content, it's not rocket science. The only problem is I found in this one in Cambodia when I was doing the training, some of the contents are not able to communicate. Then I found the people, the employees, the trainees, they didn't have experience in that area. For example, there's something on managed strategy. Managed strategy is a process which is implemented by the senior management for improving strategy. That person is supposed to be CIO with 10 to 15 years experience. Now COBIT is prepared with experts who have got more than that experience. Now, if I'm going to talk to the one IT officer who doesn't know much about strategy, which means he's not able to think at that level, then it becomes difficult. So depending on the business process expertise, you need to involve the relevant experts. The more you read, the more you'll be able to apply it. The value of COBIT is how you're able to implement it. Now, if you look at this, what I said, knowledge workers, there is a lot of content available. If you take an iron, it costs 250 rupees. But if it's made in horseshoe with some skill, it costs 1,000 rupees. Made into needles, it becomes 10,000. But if you make it as a balance springs for watches, it becomes 1 lakh rupees. So in COBIT also, there are a lot of consultants who are minting money from this by customizing COBIT. You can also do that if you know how to customize COBIT depending on requirements. Now, there is one music master who asked, why does he practice daily? He said, it's very simple. If I don't practice for 1 day, I know it. If I don't practice for 2 days, the musicians for me around me know it. If I don't practice for 3 days, the audience will know it. So what is required in implementing any framework or learning anything is that you need to practice. Now, I may have the same flute. Now, if I use the flute, the noise will come, will not be music. But if there is an expert who has mastered that, then you can get melody. So in the case of COBIT also, what is important is you should get the expertise, and you get the expertise by practice, by implementation. So what is the secret of using COBIT? Understand not just the theory, but practical perspective. Learn how to navigate, select, and customize. And you should know that COBIT is an all-purpose tool, but depending on the need, you should know. Now, this is the final slide which I wanted to communicate. A bird sitting on the branch of a tree is not worried about the strength of a branch or the wind because it has confidence in its wings. For example, let's assume the same tree, a young boy who is chased by dogs climbs a branch. Now he climbs the branch and the branch is shaking. Now just imagine the confidence of this young boy, okay, where the dogs are watching below and the birds. The dogs are barking. The bird is not worried about that because it is not worried about the strength of the branch or the winds. It has confidence in its wings. Similarly, as professionals, I think it's important that we need to develop the capacity or the wings. And COBIT is one tool which can help us enhance our capacities. So the key message I want to give was learn how to use COBIT and how it has evolved so that you can remain ahead, be continually relevant, and you can be a professional. So thank you very much. It's exactly 6 o'clock. I close. If there are questions, maybe we can take for about 5 minutes.
Thank you, sir. There are a couple of questions that have come up.
Yeah.
If you would, so I'll start with them. One from Ms. Mehta. What are the latest changes in COBIT framework? If you could point out a few.
No, see the COBIT, I said, if you see the slide which I showed, COBIT has evolved from 1996 to 2019 from various processes. Okay. So if you look at first version of COBIT had, let us say, 28 processes. It had 4 domains. So similarly, if you look at COBIT 5, it had about 36 processes. In COBIT 2019, it has got 40 processes. My simple suggestion is don't bother about what are the changes which is there. Use the latest. If you use COBIT 5, then you want to move to COBIT 2019, then you need to know what are the changes between COBIT 5 to 2019. Instead of that, if you're implementing COBIT afresh or you're learning COBIT, go to the latest one, 2019. Don't bother about what is there in the older versions. Unless if you want to use it for reference, there are various documents available where you can know, okay, what is there in COBIT 2005 and then what is there in 2019, and then you can map and check what are the updates.
So moving on, we have another question from Mr. Arbaz Khan. Should COBIT report findings be incorporated in the SOPs of the enterprise?
In the SOPs, most of the cases when an effective COBIT implementation is, for example, let's say I did some training for a government enterprise, the financial audit department of the government of Dubai. So what they did was they do audit of all the government institutions like the CAG here. They do all the audit of the government which are owned by the Sheikh. Okay, what they do in that case is when they say that the COBIT recommendation has to be done, they go to the level where whatever COBIT implementation recommendation has to be implemented, they add it as a responsibility and a performance metrics of that specific employee or the type of employees. For example, an IT manager, he has to ensure that the metrics from this one outsourcing vendors are being monitored. They add it as one of the job responsibilities. So it should be done. For example, business continuity, we helped one of the outsourcing company to implement business continuity. So in business continuity, for example, somebody is supposed to take care of check whether the server is being properly serviced effectively. They implemented that, integrated that checklist with that particular practice from COBIT. So the best way to implement is make it integrated as a part of the day-to-day practice.
Thank you, sir. That's all we have for the questions.
Okay.
Thank you so much for an insightful session, sir.
I just like to end with one poetry which I love very much. They said, "सोच बदलो तो सितारे बदल जाएंगे, नजर बदलो तो नजारे बदल जाएंगे, कश्तियां बदलने की जरूरत नहीं, दिशा बदलो तो किनारे बदल जाएंगे." So what is most important?
Wonderful quotation.
Say, "सोच बदलो." So think from a macro perspective. So if you're able to change your mindset and start using the tools, then we can definitely remain updated and relevant. So thank you very much. I enjoyed this process, and I think it was also a good learning for me. It's like one math professor was doing a complex problem of maths, and then after that 30 minutes, he turned to the class and asked, "Did you understand?" The class was staring at him, and this fellow said, "I don't know whether you understood. I understood." So in most of my COBIT presentations, whether you understood or not, I know that I have understood much better. That's what happens. So thank you very much, Subrato and Suvendo, for this opportunity. It was great talking to you. I hope you'll also circulate this video because I spent a lot of effort to see that this is available, not only currently, but also for the future. Those who have watched this presentation, so thank you very much for actually participating in this. I was really interested to see the type of interest you've shown in the questions you've done. I suggest, because this video is going to be uploaded, I suggest you go back and watch this. And if still you have got doubts, you can always write to me.
Thank you so much, Rafiq, for the wonderful presentation. I think it has been really as great as your other presentations that I've seen in the past. Absolutely mesmerizing. 2 hours, we were all spellbound, and I think we were listening in rapt attention, and particularly the complex the documentation on COBIT, the ease with which you explained, the ease with which you showed us how to implement that. I think it is one of the wonderful presentation. I have heard presentations by other speakers in the past about COVID, because COVID is not new, as you said. But this is, I would rate this presentation as one of the very best, at the very top, I believe.
Thank you
I'm
very much.
sure.
In fact, I remember I just thought one. Just give me 30 seconds. I gave you a story about the active listeners. Now I've got a sequel to that. If you go to the end of the Bhagavad Gita, now at the end of this particular Dusan, where Krishna has narrated the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna Sanjay says, now if you look at what are the reaction, Dhritarashtra, there is nothing, no reaction from him. He was really annoyed with Krishna that he wasted so much of time and motivated Arjuna, which means he still remained negative after all this Samvada Bhagavad Gita. Whereas if you look at Sanjaya, he said, so wonderful, it was my privilege and opportunity to hear Krishna's words. It's wonderful. Every time I remember, I'm really thrilled, excited like that. Okay, that's what he says. Now, it means he's just going to enjoy the words, he's not going to implement. Where Arjuna takes up the bow and arrow and says, thank you very much, I got clarity in my mind, now I can go and implement. So that's what Krishna says. Now you have to decide what type of a listener you are.
Yes, I believe that many of the ISACA Kolkata chapter members who have heard this presentation, many of them would take up the role of what Arjuna played in the Kurukshetra Yudh. So I'm sure that it was a great value add to the professionals in this eastern part of the country. We would love to have you sometime in the future, probably on a physical mode, because now that the pandemic has by the grace of God, come to an end, we can meet each other physically. So it would really be a pleasure for our chapter to invite you sometime in the future. I understand you have a very, very busy schedule, but in spite of your busy schedule, if you can take out some time and give us a live workshop kind of a thing in the
No, I'll be
future.
more than happy to do that. In fact, we can also do it as a one-day workshop or a two-day workshop. Maybe a one-day workshop ideally to get started, so that
Yes.
participants will actually get a hands-on experience of how to
Yes,
use it.
yes.
Here we just
I
talk
mean,
about theory. In the
yes,
workshop, we actually make them work through the COVID content. So at the end of it, they know, okay, this is how we can swim through COVID.
yes, absolutely. And I believe that if we can circulate it well in advance, then probably they will be able to prepare themselves
Yeah, yeah,
before they actually come for your workshop.
yeah,
Because a little bit of study from before may
yeah,
help them to understand, appreciate, and implement them much better.
yeah.
Probably we can do that in the future. So thank you once again, Rafiq, and you have a wonderful weekend ahead. Thank you so much. Thank you
Thank
all
you
for your
and
participation.
namaste.
Namaste.